Hey Luke, this is Michael from East Bay Prep. Okay, I'd like to review your score report with you, so let's begin. Looks like we scored a 1220 overall. You can see right here, and let's just look at your score history and see how we've been doing. So it looks like in July, or I guess the beginning of August, you could say, you were scoring an 1120, and now about a month later, you're scoring a 1220, so you have some solid improvement. It looks like that improvement has increased in every category. Now what I'd like to do is show you, just in this video, how we can pick this up to a 30, this up to a 30, and let's pick this up to a 33. So if you recall, from a 29 to a 30, that's 10 extra points. Here is 10 extra points, and math counts as double, right? So that's always fun. So we have 40 extra points. Watch this video, take some notes, and then get 40 extra points on your next test just from this material alone. Let's begin. Okay, so here's our distribution of right to wrong answers. The ones in black, remember, the ones that you answered, and the ones in blue, well, those are going to be the correct answers. And as you can see, you didn't run out of time, and you missed most right here in this particular passage. What I'll do is I'll show you exactly how we read fiction as opposed to nonfiction. There's a specific strategy to extract as much information as we can get based off the type of answers that they're going to give us. We'll go into that in just a second. Writing doesn't look like we ran out of time either. You might have been time sensitive towards the end here because I see you have a higher frequency of wrong answers and it does not get progressively harder. So maybe towards 22 you were thinking, oh, I'm running out of time, so you weren't thinking as deeply about each question, which is okay. We can overcome that as well. Math looks great. You've improved quite a lot actually. So from a 32 to 32 is actually a big number, especially since they count as double, so you have to get twice as many right in order to accomplish that task as opposed to getting 2 more points in reading or writing. And the ones that you missed were sort of in the middle. These are going to be the more complicated ones, so this is pretty good. It tells me that you were paying attention when you were going through these questions. You might just have a few knowledge gaps that we can go over right now. Math here, no calculator, same thing. You might have been running out of time, but again, they get progressively harder. But you didn't answer this one. You answered these down here, so you probably just didn't understand this question and you left it blank. Okay, so now let's go into our breakdown. Now, if you recall, this breakdown shows us the types of questions that we missed, right? And so in command of evidence, we have textual evidence, charts and graphs, author's purpose, and then we have words in context, information and ideas, rhetoric and reasoning. And our goal here is to find our area of opportunity. Those are the questions that we missed the most of. Now, we're going to skip past textual evidence. That's where you go and you find the evidence or the line number based off of the other question that you picked. As we get better at reading and we tackle some of these, and we don't have any more knowledge gaps in these areas, then we'll go into these just to pick them off one by one. Okay, so let's go to read closely because that's a common theme that I see here. Read closely questions. Those are ones where you're going to find the answers in the details of the passage. Remember, we need to know all of this passage, the whole thing. They're not just going to test us on the gestalt or the main points or the topic sentences. We want to know the details, so we need to read closely. So we're going to focus on this first. Now, after that, we're going to go into writing. Now, writing has the same structure here. Which area do you think would be your area of opportunity based off of the answers that you got wrong? Right, we have precision, concision, and tone. See, you missed 4 of these questions here. So if we just picked up this specific category or we learned about this type of questions, we have 4 questions here that we could get right next time. Now, what about math? Right, there's a huge breadth of material in math. Some of them you only have a couple questions, but if you were looking at this, what area do you think you could focus on in math? Okay, yeah, the one that you missed the most in, right? And so here we have 3 of them here in reading, graphs, and scatter plots. So if we just go through here, we take some notes down, I can show you how you read a few of these graphs and scatter plots. Imagine getting these 3 extra points right just based off of this quick video. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here today. We're going to focus on that area in math. We're going to focus on the precision, concision, tone, and writing. And we're going to go into read closely in reading. Let's begin. Okay, let's see, number 10 for read closely. So I mentioned that in the first passage, I was going to show you how we read from passage to passage, fiction versus nonfiction. Well, in fiction, which is what you're going to get in the beginning here, we're always going to get character development. It's going to be a story about someone or a group of people or interactions between people. And so we want to know how people thought or what they're doing, something about them. We're not totally interested in just the minutia of the passage, right? The details that surround the character. We want to know about the character's inner thoughts and his relationships. So as we read, if we pick up on that information, then we're going to be armed with all the stuff that we need in order to get questions right, or at least primed, right, and to get the questions right as we go into the 10 questions below. And I'll show you what I mean. So let's go into the details here. For read closely, which is number 10. And which statement best characterizes the relationship? You see that word relationship between Semper and Charles Dickens. Okay, so it's a relationship question. So what we want to do, we know it's a read closely, so it's going to be a particular detail. Now, if you were reading closely as you were going through each paragraph, you should be thinking about, okay, well, when was it talking about the relationship between these two people? And if we're actively reading defined relationships, then we're going to have a better understanding of where this might be, as opposed to having no clue and then having to read through the whole passage. So then you would realize that that would be somewhere around here, right? Okay, somewhere around there. So what I'd like you to do right now is just pause this video, and I'd like you to answer this question for yourself. Remember, we don't look at the answer choices until we've gone back and we've found evidence. So you can pause it right now. Okay, so let's read. One Christmas, Semper gave me the best gift I ever received. It was an old volume, Great Expectation by Charles Dickens. So it looks like he gave the narrator a book. I was aware that Semper knew a few authors who frequented his establishment, and judging by the care for which he handled the volume, I thought perhaps Mr. Dickens was one of them. A friend of yours, a lifelong friend, and from now on, he's your friend too. Okay, so it looks like Semper was a friend, not really of Mr. Dickens, right? He was an author, and so what he's saying is, I read these books a lot. And so we need to understand the details, or I guess you could say the nuance of that in the passage. So now let's go over here and let's check our answer choices and see which one best illustrates that relationship between Semper and Dickens. Okay, let's just tackle these one by one. Hopefully you picked your answer and we'll figure it out if you got it right. Okay, so Semper models his own writing after Dickens' style. Well, this looks interesting, but did it say Semper was an author? Did he say he was a writer? Nope, not at all. And so because it didn't say that he was a writer, this is what we call a throwaway. If one part of the answer is incorrect, the whole answer is incorrect. Therefore, A is wrong. Semper is an avid admirer of Dickens' work. That's true, right? He said he's a lifelong friend. You saw it was a worn book, so he must have been reading it quite a lot. So we can't take this off the table. I'll put a little star next to it. Semper feels a personal connection to the details of his biography. Well, did it mention anything about a biography? Nope, sure didn't. But could you say he might have felt a personal connection between Dickens' biography? You could say, right, maybe we could infer that, oh, he might have read his biography and this might be true. And you would be right. It might be true. It's probable. It's practical. But it's not substantiated in the text. And this is a textual-based reading test. So we can only infer information from the text. We can't take stuff outside. Okay, so even if there was like point A and point B and point C, and you know for a fact that if A was in the text, A always leads to B, and then B always leads to C, it doesn't work that way. We have to find evidence in the passage almost verbatim, word for word. If you don't find it, then it's wrong. Semper considers himself to be Dickens' most appreciative reader. Well, he might, right? I mean, he said he's a lifelong friend. The book's pretty worn. But was there a comparison between him and other readers? No, I didn't see a comparison there. So saying he's the most appreciative, well, that's a comparison. Because we didn't see one, this has to be incorrect. And therefore, again, we're left with the answer choice B. So there's two ways to answer questions. One is to go through and figure out which one most or best suits the answer that you pick based off of your understanding of the passage, right? And then you would pick B and you would say, oh, that sounds great. Or if you're not quite sure, you can look for throwaways. We found a throwaway here, we found a throwaway here, we found a throwaway here. So there's two ways to answer the question. If one breaks down, use the other one. Okay, so that's number 10, and that was fiction. So now we're going to go into 47. Now 47 is going to be nonfiction. How do I know? Because of the number. So I know it's going to be a nonfiction passage. 47. Okay, it's going to be in this for this passage here. Now remember the first one, I said fiction. We're going to have to. It's going to do with character development. Well, this is not. Okay, so this passage is adapted from Daniel, What a Plant Knows, a Field Guide to the Senses. Okay, so this has to do with plants, specifically Venus flytraps. Now, the cool thing about nonfiction is that usually the first paragraph, or I'm sorry, the first sentence of each paragraph gives us a really big clue as to what we're going to talk about for the rest of the paragraph. Now, for the fiction above, sometimes the paragraphs can be very small, sometimes there's a lot of dialogue, so it's not quite as clear, but for this one, it should be very clear. The Venus flytrap needs to know when an ideal meal is crawling across its leaves. Okay, so I assume we're going to expand on that theme. Like, it needs to know. Why does it need to know? How does it know? What is food for a Venus flytrap? Any of those questions could be answered in that paragraph. We can take a look at this system, right? What system? So I'll have to go refer to the previous sentence. If the insect touches just one hair, the trap will not spring shut, but a large enough bug will likely touch two hairs within about 20 seconds, and that signal springs the Venus flytrap into action. We can look at this system. The system above being described as two hairs being triggered within 20 seconds, indicating a big bug, which would shut the fly trap. So that's what it's referring to with this system, and analogous to short-term memory. So now we're going to go into short-term memory and how it's analogous to the system that was described above. Okay, so you notice how I'm doing this with paragraph structure, and that way I'm priming myself with the information I'm about to read. And the great thing about priming yourself is this: you can read faster when you have information primed. You were a little kid, remember having stories read, once upon a time this, once upon a time that. We're priming our imaginations to know what's about to come next. So this is what we want to do. And also, this eliminates mistakes in interpretation, and it helps us to retrieve answers quickly when we're going down to the answer choices. So there's lots of benefits to recognizing what you're about to read before you actually read it. Okay, so I think that's enough for learning how to read the passage. Let's go into this question and then move on. Number 47. 47. Okay, so according to the passage, which statement best explains why the Venus flytrap requires a second trigger? So we want the one that explains why the Venus flytrap requires a second trigger to be touched within a short period of time in order for its trap to close. Okay, so hopefully this would have jogged your memory as to maybe where you would find this information. Let's go back into the passage. Remember, we don't want to look at this information. It's only going to color our judgment. We want to be able to answer it for ourselves. So we want to know why we need two touches within a short period of time. So we know in this paragraph here, right, it was sort of leading us to it. So let's continue. So they're puzzled by the question. A century later, they proposed that fly trap stored information regarding how many hairs were touched by an electrical charge. It was elegant but simple. They discovered that it was the cause of an electric potential. So here's what caused it: an electric potential versus the polarity of the membrane that induces calcium channels to open. So the calcium channels open. This calcium channel is similar to the process that occurs during the communication between animals, okay, causing rapid increase in concentration. They proposed that, notice how I didn't say anything about the second yet, right? We're talking about the second touch within a short period of time. So I know I'm not quite there yet. It's probably going to be down here. They proposed that in a relatively high concentration, in order to close the single action potential from just one trigger hair being touched, does not reach this level. Okay, so we're talking about one hair does not reach that level. Therefore, a second hair needs to be stimulated to push the calcium concentration over this threshold and spring the trap. So we're saying we need a second hair to be stimulated in order for those calcium channels to be pushed over the edge and trigger the trap to close. So somehow these calcium channels have an effect triggering it to close. The encoding of this information maintains a high enough level of calcium so that the second trigger pushes the total concentration over the threshold. It doesn't happen quickly. The final concentration won't be high enough to close the trap. So it has to happen quickly, otherwise it won't be enough. The memory is lost, I guess they could say. I think we have a good understanding of what we're talking about here. So now we can go back into the question, whatever question that was, 47, and hopefully arrive at the correct answer. Why don't you take a look at this and you figure out what you think the correct answer is. Okay, so pause the video if you still need some more time, and let's take a look. The second trigger produces an electrical charge that reverses the charge produced by the first trigger. Okay, so did it reverse the charge produced by the first trigger? Did it say that? Well, I think it used the word reverse up here somewhere. it says reverse the electric polarity of the cell membrane, right? And so what that means is we're actually creating a charge by reversing the polarity. That induces the calcium channels to open. So it's sort of a play on words, and if you think about it, because it uses this word reverse here, it's a decoy answer. It wants you to think that this might have been the reason why, but if you read closely, it wasn't saying this at all, so A has to be incorrect. The second trigger stabilizes the surge of the calcium ions created by the first trigger. Well, we know it has something to do with calcium ions, and we know they were created on the first trigger, but the word stabilize is suspect. What does stabilize mean? It means that, hey, they were there, that the surge of calcium was there, and we just didn't let it subside, right? It didn't say increase it, it just said stabilize it. So that's really not what we're talking about, and this is most likely going to be wrong. That's most likely a throwaway, but it's not wrong enough, so I'll just put a little slash next to it. The second trigger prompts the calcium channels to open. When did the calcium channels open? Was that during the first trigger or the second trigger? And if you're not sure, you should go back to paragraph 3 and check out for yourself, because it definitely was going to be the first trigger, so this is wrong. The second trigger provides a necessary supplement to the calcium concentration released. Yes, that's exactly it. So it pushes it over the edge. That's what it said. And so therefore, it supplements it just enough so that it actually triggers a release. So D is the correct answer, and B would therefore be incorrect. Remember, this isn't a black and white binary type of system here. Some answers are just better than other answers. And so you can always think of this as the best answer, right, as opposed to the only answer. Now, if you think about it, B, right, this word stabilize, that really doesn't work in this case. But sometimes it's close. So always look for these throwaways, and then you can arrive at the right answer, or at least eliminate enough choices where you'd be guessing out of 2 rather than 4. Okay, so that's it for reading for us. We talked about fiction, we talked about nonfiction, we talked about reading passages and priming information, we talked about different types of questions that you may go over. Take down notes on that and use that for the next time that you're taking a test. Okay, so now we're in writing, precision, concision, and tone. So without going into the types of questions, I might as well just show you them so we could talk about them together. Again, you're going to write some information down. Now, precision, concision, tone, a lot of this has to do with word choice, has to do with what's called redundancy, or meaning repeating words or implied meaning, and it has to do with illustration. You know, the best word for the tone of the passage and for the whatever we're trying to convey. So let's take a look here, and let's read this. As a result, organic material that is sent to landfills contributes to the release of methane, a very potent greenhouse gas. So when this is underlined, what we need to do is find an analogous word here. Now, we don't want to read these words yet. We want to try to figure out if there's any clues in the passage, right? There's usually going to be a clue. But as I'm reading this, I'm saying, release of methane, a very potent greenhouse gas. And this is the last sentence of the paragraph, so I know it's not going to go into that more, right? And so if you don't know what this word potent means, then you're going to be stuck. Now, fortunately, we can look at these answer choices, and we can decide if these even fit the tone of the passage. Let's find out. So sturdy, what does sturdy really mean? Like, you know, the literal definition of sturdy, what would you say? Yeah, maybe rigid, like a sturdy book, right? Something like that. Sturdy has to do with being rigid, right? Not rigid greenhouse gas. That wouldn't make any sense in the context here. You have to take the definitions literally, and the literal definition of sturdy definitely does not fit. How about influential? What kind of things are influential? Right, this is just a gas. Can a gas be influential? Or are people influential? Right, people are influential, right? Ideas are influential, right? You know, something, a non-animate object is not influential. So again, has the wrong meaning. How about commanding? Does the greenhouse gas actually command something? No, it doesn't. Remember, it's the literal meaning. And the sooner you recognize that you're always going to find the literal meaning, the quicker that you're going to get these questions right. So even if you didn't know what potent means, and even if it didn't have any clues in the context of the passage, we can still recognize that these words are just totally out of place, right? The actual definition of the word does not fit the meaning of this passage. We do not have a poetic license to interpret words in some other ways. We can't make poetic jumps in it. We have to keep the literal meaning of the word, and therefore answer choice A is correct. Let's go to number 22. 22. Oh no. Oh no. Okay. 22. So much scrolling, so little time. Okay, let's see. Okay, so what we're going to do is read this as it's written, and then we're going to decide for ourselves. I'll give you a quick hint here. This has to do with redundancy. Okay, redundancy. Redundant. Okay. Now, redundant, there's two types of redundancy. One is where we repeat information that was already stated, and number two is implied information. Okay, when we repeat information, we actually repeat the same words or analogous words. If it's implied, it's information that we just assume is correct based off of something that we know. For example, I breathe, or I breathe air, right? If I breathe, it's implied that air is involved, okay? How about this? If I flip a coin to get heads or tails, right? If I'm flipping a coin, I know there's only two options, so I can just say flip a coin to see if I get heads. Tails, I don't even need to say, so that's an example of implied. Okay, so why don't you read number 22 for me, the whole sentence, and then we can go through it together. You can pause it now. Okay, let's go. It then tunes up the bills and spits out the money-filled envelopes instead of chewing it up. Okay, it then chews up the bills and spits out the money-filled envelope instead of chewing it up. Well, it says chewing it up, and then Sarah says chewing it up, right? So we know there's some sort of a repeating pattern there. Also, if it's already chewing up the bills, and then the envelope isn't really filled with money anymore, is it? So it just doesn't even logically make sense, not just being redundant. Envelope that has been dangling from the doorway. Notice how I just read this sentence, but guess what? If we read a little further up here, we're going to see that dangling from the doorway is something that was already mentioned. So therefore, B is going to be incorrect. Okay, C, the envelope that has the money in it. Well, we already know it has the money in it, don't we? Because it says a money-filled envelope. Money-filled envelope, right? And so we crossed out A. So over here it says bills. Okay, so bills. So we already know it has money in it. Lots of indication of money. So we know C has to be incorrect. So now we're just left with D. So usually in questions like this, you always want to look for the most concise answer. Pick that one first. Okay, that's usually going to be the correct option. And then if that's not, then you can find the next most concise answer. Use that as your game plan next time you come across questions like this. Okay, so that's precision, concision, tone. I hope that was helpful. You took down some notes there. Now let's get into this math. Now we have reading graphs and scatter plots. So we're going to have number 10 here in section 4. That'll be the first question that we're going to review. Now this is a doozy. You can see there's lots of different options here. Why don't we read this question together and figure out what it's asking? Water pours into the glass. Remember, it's referring to this glass right there. Slowly at a constant rate. Which of the following illustrates the height the water travels as it fills up the glass? Now I have a question for you. If I have a glass and it's like this, it's like a beaker, and I have a glass that looks like this, right? And let's say they have the exact same volume, even though my picture represents that they don't. Which one do you think would fill up faster? Which one do you think the height would change more quickly? This one or this one? Right, probably this one, right? You can intuitively see that this one, the height would fill up faster because the volume increases by virtue of the height, more so when it's really long and slender than when it's narrow, like this one. I'm sorry, when it's like flattened, like this one. Okay, so what that means is anywhere where I see that it's narrower, it's going to fill up faster. Anywhere that I see it's broader, it's going to fill up more slowly. So I could say, like, let's say this one over here, right? This is where it's narrow. It's narrow right here, right? So this is going to fill up quickly. Now, what about from here to here, right? This is a little broader, so it's going to fill up slowly, and this is going to fill up slowly. So I need that height, right, to not be as quickly increased over time. Now, which one is that? Which one is that? Well, this one is a steady increase over time, right? So it's as if the height just changed steadily. So I wouldn't expect that the volume to increase in terms of the radius of this circle here, right? And so this one wouldn't be correct. How about this one? Well, this is like just the opposite. It's as if it had a very large base, and then towards the top it was a little bit smaller. So in this case, it would this would work this way, but that's not what we had here. It was the opposite. So our answer choice is going to be C. So take a look at that, and you can think about it a little bit if you want in order to understand if that's correct. Okay, last one. Let's go into number 22 here. Okay, so now number 22, I guess we can go to 20, probably the next one too if you want. Okay, number 22, which of the following is closest to the percent increase of billions of pounds of plastic from 2000 to 2003. So there's definitely going to be a graph involved here, and so we're going to have to scroll up in order to find that. But the question is, what is the equation for percent increase? Well, we're always going to find the old, right, the old amount, and then we find the new minus the old, and then we multiply that by 100. And that's how we're going to find percent increase. So if we go up here, right, we said 2000 to 2003, and it says it starts at 1985. So we're going to have to add 15 years, right, to get to 2000. So that's 2000. And 2003, so that's 2001, 2002, 2003, which is this point right here. Okay, so it looks like this first one, the old one, we're at 100. And it looks like the new one here, we're at 110. Okay, so I have my old, I have my new. If you're not quite sure how to do this, right, you can pretty much figure it out if you wanted to. But let's just take out our handy dandy calculator. And so we have 110. We're going to subtract 100. And we're going to divide that by 100. And then we're going to multiply that by 100. A lot of hundreds here, huh? Equals 10%. And trust me, you could have definitely just done that in your head or done it on paper. And if you couldn't, you should really think about trying to do a little bit more mental math as you're practicing. It's really going to help you out. And that's going to give us 10%, right? That's not too bad. Just remember to always interpret the graph. It said 1985, so we want to add 15 years. It's not always going to be starting at year 0, right? So let's figure out that way. Okay, next one is 28. 28, let's see what's going on here. Ooh, looks like we have 22 students, and this is a distribution model of those students. And so here it's beats before exercise, right? And here's the beats after exercise. It looks like after exercise, the distribution of the beats is going to be broader than before exercise. Let's see what we're asking here. Here, S1 and R1 are the standard deviation and the range, okay, of these things. So this would be 1, I guess, and this would be 2. So the standard deviation of 1 would be here. The standard deviation of 2 would be here. So it's asking us about the differences between the standard deviations and the range. Well, what is range? Range is the difference between the largest number and the smallest number. Well, let's see if there is a difference here, right? So 88 to 56, is there a difference there, right? If I was going to add this, what would I get? I would need 32, right? So 88 minus 56 is going to give us 32. That's a great 3, isn't it? 32. How about from 80 to 112? Well, 112 minus 80, that's also going to be 32, isn't it? So we know that the range has to be the same. So anywhere where the range is different, it's going to be wrong, right? So those have to be wrong. So I'm left with A and I'm left with D. And now this has to do with our interpretation of standard deviation. Standard deviation is a measure of the variation or the distribution of the data. So if the distribution of the data is very narrow, something like this, right? It's not very distributed at all. Well, you would say that the standard deviation is very low. It's a small number. But if the variation, right, let's say there's a line there, but if the variation is spread out and this pushed down and this kind of expanded out and it was more of a, that's not a very good one. Let's do another one. And let's say it was more like this, right, over time. And because it's the distribution is spread out more, you would say the standard deviation is very high. Which one of these distribution models that you see here has a variation that's more spread out? Is that this first one or is that the second one? Right, that would be the second one. Right, this one is spread out quite a lot. And so we know the answer choice is going to be the one where it's more spread out. And hey, that's not even an option. It's just, are they the same or are they different? Well, they're definitely different. So that's going to be answer choice D. So if you're not really sure how to measure the distribution of the data via standard deviation, you want to write down that and take down notes on that. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. We went through quite a bit of information there. And if you follow all that advice that I gave you, you'll capitalize on these extra 40 points at least, right? And then you have more to go. But if you have any other questions, please let me know, and I look forward to your continued improvement. Thank you.